second. May we have a roll call?
Mrs. Dobler,
Here.
Mr. Kinley,
Here.
Mrs. Petrowski,
Here.
all members present.
Thank you. We will now have courtesy of floor on any agenda items. Is anybody signed up?
I didn't go get the sheet, but did anybody sign up that would like to speak? Okay, well,
Call to speak, but you haven't read what's being presented, so I don't know what to ask you questions about.
that's fine. We'll have one later.
Okay.
All right. Item 4, project discussions. The committee has been given some information regarding the site logic report. And ready to make your presentation?
So I'm going to start with an overview of how we got to this point. And if you recall at the board meeting, you all got copies of the report, and that came about with the conversation of, and I'll draw your attention to the one page that you all got from me, I think that was last week.
Yeah.
That looks like this. The idea of that was you have both numbers. What the priority items that Mark and I established based on the committee's input of across the district what you wanted to focus on in terms of HVAC and building envelope. We pulled out what the number was in the Hunt report, and we tried to extrapolate to, from the middle school report you have from SiteLogic, an estimate of where costs have gone since you got the Hunt report. Now, today, and I'll ask, I'll turn it over in a second for SiteLogic to explain how they did this, but if you look at the colored sheet that I gave you, there is a back to it, and I'll draw your attention to the back, because they took those items that Mark and I put together, and they have done their own escalation from the Hunt report. Do you want to explain how you went about that, just so that the committee has an understanding?
Sure. Hi, I'm Damian Spar with SiteLogic. I'll try and put this at the right distance. What we did was, in taking the information that was put together by Dr. Almer and Mr. Wall, we went back to the Hunt report and said, where did that original number come from? That original number came from the detail within the Hunt report. It was just bare subcontractor construction costs, but it didn't have in any of the Hunt soft costs or design contingencies, et cetera, that are on their summary page. What we did was we took those items and we put the Hunt summary page, I'm going to call them markups, but they were basically soft costs and then contingencies. We applied that, which was about 1.43%, 1.47, not percent, but 1.47. And we looked at that and we said, what's the difference for escalation from where Hunt was to now? And we applied that as well. So if we assume that those Hunt numbers were correct, that were pulled out from the report, they now have our total project costs that are escalated. We haven't gone back and independently made sure those Hunt numbers are right. We think that they're probably reasonable when you escalate them the way they did. Now, what the administration did before was they took that bare Hunt number and they escalated it by, I think, about 16%. So what we found was the escalation wasn't as high, but those other costs that had to be put in there, contingencies, et cetera, had to. So our number ends up being a little bit higher than what was put out in front of you. Regardless of where we are showing you these numbers, our attempt is going to be to try and get as much as we can for lesser amounts. But rather than start off with a number that's just too low and we're fighting to get to something unachievable, we looked at the whole thing to try and make sure that we had the right idea going in. Then as you start to look at all of this in a total, it will be our goal to spend as little bit as possible on whatever scope you want to choose, but what we wanted to do was at least have our starting expectation at the right level and having not left something out or not taken into account escalation. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, thank you.
So I just want to, so you have both, just so for your reference as committee members, what Mark and I have prepared. Do you need a new microphone?
I'm gonna close that door because.
Oh.
that-
So that you can see a reference of what Mark and I pulled out of the study in terms of escalation versus what you have in front of you. I do want to go back to the front page of that colored sheet, just so that we can talk through, if you recall, from the full report at the board meeting, all three of them talked about, as they went through the middle school, the alarm and alert items and what that meant. They also mentioned, and I'll share this with the whole board because I got it today, so I'll share it out, the estimate for food service, because that was one of the areas we wanted them to look at, so we had an idea. Again, if we went into another building, what types of what kinds of things you would be looking at in terms of cost for food service items. And also, we knew a large ticket item that we really didn't talk about ever in the Hunt study was the pool at the high school. So you see there an estimate of pool at the high school. Again, not that that is currently in a state that we think has to be addressed immediately, but it's good for you as a committee to have an estimate of, in your mind, if that starts to become a problem, what are we looking at, and what would we face in terms of needing to address that particular system. I remember having a conversation about chillers at the high school, because that was not part of we didn't even have a number from Hunt at first, if you'll remember. When we initially got that Hunt report, it was noted that they recommended we look at them in the near future, but they didn't have a cost at that point. So you now have an estimated cost on here as well, based on going back to Hunt and asking them to give us a number. So really, I want to start by going back to, and I have copies if you didn't bring them with you, the report that you got from
Do you have one? I've got
Site
one.
Logic at the board meeting. One of the things that we said we would do today is, if the committee itself, if any committee members had questions about any of the information in that report that you saw as you had time to look through it, now's the time. They're here if you have any detailed type of questions about how they went about getting that in. I mean, we got a little bit of overview in the public meeting, but if there's anything that has come up since then that you've read through this and you have questions for them, they're here. Any questions about this, anything specific in the report?
So as it's labeled, this is only for the middle school?
Correct.
Okay.
And, sorry, I don't want to speak for all of you, but I will say that one of the things that we did, and I think I said this in the board meeting, we know in the different lists of things that are on our priorities, that the middle school was the place where we thought we could get a comprehensive look at all the systems and have numbers, instead of going back and going through every individual building.
So this is, if they did that, this is kind of what each report would look like, which in the level of detail in that, okay.
And also, if you decided to move, if the board decides to move forward with these projects, you would get a more detailed look at each specific project with with a cost as you move forward with a decision. I don't want the committee to think you're gonna make a recommendation and have no idea what the final cost is gonna be. That final cost is gonna come with a board action at some point if you decide to go down that path.
What we would do is, if we leave here today with some direction that we would like to start, and there's a discussion about how we move ahead with design, but to make it easy and kind of get it out in the open, if you ask that we start moving ahead with this so you can have more information, knowing that the elementary schools, that the other schools in the high school have things that we want to look at that are highest priority, we can start down that path and at the same time coordinate with Dr. Ulmer and the administration to provide you with more detailed reports on all the schools so that you're starting down the path of conquering the most important priority items in the elementary schools and the high school. You've got all the information you need at the middle school because that was the first places we wanted to look. That way you can have a plan going forward, whether you enact any of that or sprinkle it in or even come in the next few years and pick off other things from the detailed studies. You'll then have a comprehensive look at all the schools and you'll be down the road toward taking care of the priority items that we're looking at now. So we'll run those activities in parallel for you. Then as we're designing and getting deeper into all the things that are there, what we'll do is we'll provide you with an estimate before our final numbers come in. That way, you'll be able to say, we like this one thing, but it can be an alternate. These other things in a list are going to be things we really want. If we choose to afford these alternates, we'll afford them when the numbers come in and we can make a decision as a board. That's how we would suggest it if it works well for the district that way.
The items on this sheet that say summer 2024, those are the ones that are recommended by Mark and you.
Yep.
These numbers are not what the numbers that you gave us, because the numbers you gave us are top. They're max.
They have the contingencies and everything. The numbers that are there, the
Yeah.
administration got right out of the Hunt study for like subcontractor costs and then escalated it, but didn't have the contingencies and the design
Okay.
fees and all that other stuff, the soft costs.
All right.
So yes, you should look at a max that way. That's
Okay.
correct.
I think of it this way, and I know you're smart, and I'm not trying to make you sound dumb, Patrice, or Mrs. Dobler, but I could go to Lowe's and buy a door, and it might cost me $500. But if I pay somebody to put it in, I might have $750 by the time the door's in because I paid them to do it. They might have had to go back and get a new hinge because one of mine's broken, So what Mark and I gave you was the cost of the door, but the entire cost is on this colored document, on the back.
Okay.
And what he's saying is, they are gonna be, there's a percentage in any job for contingency. There's also a design. You wouldn't have design for your front door, but you moved it, you might have design. And what I want to draw your attention to on the back of that sheet, if you look where it says underneath the chart, Jersey Shore Area School District Capital Project Summary, they've given you a list of things. That includes from the report, the middle school alarm and alert, which they've costed out, all those things they talked about last week that they've identified as alarm and alert. The food service number, which they just gave you, which I said we haven't determined if that's something that we really have to move forward with yet, but so you have a number. The high school pool, the high school chillers, which Mark and I didn't initially identify as a dire need right now. But there's a number there for all those priority items. The beauty of having all of this in one spot and giving you that $8.9 million isn't to shock you. I know it is, but it's not. That wasn't the purpose. But the purpose of that is, if you remember, and I brought it with me so I can show it to you, because I knew you wouldn't all have this in front of you. If you remember back to multiple presentations from Jamie Doyle in PFM, she told the board multiple times that she would recommend, if we borrowed money, you don't go beyond the 9.9, you don't go to 10 million, because anything under 10 million, you don't have to go out and do a bond issue. You can do bank financing. Everybody remember that? So I actually brought with me her chart I know it's a year old, but it's here if you want to remember the conversation. She did a 3-step, and each of the steps was, two of the 3 steps was stay under that $10 million mark. So you can even, just looking at step 1, if we borrowed under $10 million, once our current debt is paid off, your $2.5 million existing annual debt payment would go down to $680,000 a year. So even if you went to that 9.9 mark, in 2030, your current existing 2.5 annual debt service payment drops to $680,000 by extending your current debt limit. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, you'd still be on track for, you'd get it, what you currently owe would come out of the books into 2030, and then that 10 million would cost you 680,000 annually going forward until 2050.
What about, okay, is that structured to absorb the 686,000 between now and the payoff?
Yes, so if you, remember she gave us 2 scenarios. One, I think she called it capitalized.
Yes.
You can take your current debt and roll it into that and not go above your current amount, which gives you a little bit less borrowing power. But yes, we could ask them to structure it that way, that your annual cost wouldn't go up.
Yeah, between now and when the other debt is paid off.
Correct.
Now, obviously, the rates have changed quite a bit, so.
I would have to have her run a new number, but yes, the rates have changed, and I didn't reach out to her today because I pulled this and I thought, well, we know it's a year old, the rates have changed. I don't know that it's gonna change. I don't think you're gonna see another 100,000. You might, I don't even hazard a guess. I'd have to go back to her and say, and I actually have that on my to-do list, to call her up and say, can you run this with current numbers and just show us,
Right.
you know, the 9.9 and what does that look like? Is the committee okay with that? Like, I'll get a new one with just a 1-step. Like, she gave us 3 steps. I can do a 1-step.
Well, at this point, I think, yeah, 1 step is probably enough. I mean, that gives us a flavor for, because if you go to the front page of the handout, it shows 20 million. Does the 20 million include the food service and everything else on the front page? It does not?
No.
Okay.
The other thing that I want to make sure you're thinking about when you see that 20 million, that the acceptable isn't something that you have to worry about, in 20 years? I mean, that's way far out into time. Caution really isn't, I don't think that you're going to see a lot of the cautionary things creeping into what you would want to do with this 10 million. If there's something that jumps out at you and, I think we talked at the board meeting about what if it's at the end of its life, but we still think it has more life? Well, then we all know, hey, and I think I referenced my car, the car has 200 75,000 miles on it, but I'm figuring it's going past 300. But I have to be smart enough to know if it breaks down and I don't want to fix it, I got to buy a new car. If there's anything, I don't think there's really anything in the caution that's like that. So that's why we looked at this and said, if you're going to be looking out for your, your next 5 years of what you're doing in that middle school, it's really the alarm and the alert. And that allows you to take good care, and I want to be really put a fine point on that. Take good care of your middle school because you're doing the first two priorities there, and do the things that you need to do in the other buildings and the things that are down below. Maybe we don't need to do food service, or maybe we put some of that off. When we look at these scopes, it's most affordable for you if you buy them soon, even if you want to install them over 2 to 3 years. Buying anything earlier, you're going to have it, you can put it in, you can have less disruption to the educational process, but let's make sure we need it. If we don't think that we're going to need it, then we push it out or we bid it as an alternate and we don't accept it. So even though that says $20 million there, we think that for the next many years to come, for your planning, really you're focused on those first two categories.
So, and both of those categories relate only to middle school.
That's correct.
So, not to confuse, we've got this list that covers, middle school is not even on there except for a small, the refrigeration cooling unit of 29,000.
So that refrigeration unit at the middle school that you're seeing on that district priority list that Dr. Almer provided,
Yeah,
the replacement of that is included within the food service
Okay.
number that we provided.
all right.
Okay, so I would just direct you to the colored sheet, which kind of shows the more comprehensive district priority list that is taking into consideration those costs.
But if, again, going to the backside, okay, I see the food service, the chillers. So all of these are
Or
included,
over here.
okay, but they would be included in district-wide priority items?
Yep.
Okay,
So they took this information from Mark and I, and they rolled it over onto the back of this sheet and costed it out in the
yep,
section below.
gotcha.
I wanted to make sure I gave you that so you could see the detail that Mark and I gave them, but it's really all there.
So if we said, just as an example, right now it looks like 8.9 million is kind of what, if we told Jamie, obviously it's less than 10 million, that's, yeah, okay.
That's why it was good for you guys to see all this and to hear. There may be things on this list that we as a team ultimately decide, hey, that's not really a priority right now, or it can go longer, and we can tailor what we ask Jamie, even though we ask her to run a scenario at 9.9. When we get to the point where we're going to borrow and we've identified what's going to be done, we're not gonna borrow 9.9, we don't need it. We're gonna borrow what we need, and your payment will reflect a lower amount.
Right.
Because ultimately, and we've had this I don't know if the committee and I have had this conversation, but I did this before, and that was the purpose of the 3-year list that Mark and I gave, because that money, if you borrow money, you have 3 years to expend it. So you could borrow money this fall, use it for 3 summers for projects. You don't have to spend it immediately the year after you take that funding into your books.
Right.
So you do have the ability, and this is why Mark and I patterned it this way, is you can give yourself time to work through projects. And that way, something comes up year 2, and you have something that's not really as high priority, and something comes up and you have the money, the board can shift, and that's why Damien's saying, you can alternate things when you go out to bid and say, well, maybe we put this on here, but it's not necessarily something that we're gonna do if we decide it's not something we move forward with in our funding. Does that make sense?
Yep. But I have questions.
Okay, go for it. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
And you're gonna have to talk to me like I'm dumb because I don't understand.
I'll
Okay?
try to.
All right, on the sheet that you gave
Okay.
us, the Avis Elementary Place Unit ventilators. So the Hunt report is 210, and it says site logic update is 353,000, so that's another 143,000.
Logic's 331.
Yeah, and then on this sheet,
Yeah, they updated it. This is the newest, so I would go by that. So over here where,
but why
Okay.
did that go up even on this sheet, even though this is the newest? Why would it go up that much, $143,000?
do you want to respond to that?
Yeah,
I know we
Okay.
talked about unit ventilators, but I can't
Well,
remember what we talked about.
what, we start with the bear hunt number that we had for that particular item. And you'll see that the other items will follow similarly. What Hunt did was they said, here, your bear subcontractor numbers is an amount that's on the detailed parts of the Hunt report where you see the pictures. When you go to the summary of the Hunt report, then they take that and they say, we can only see so much, so there's a design contingency. There's a contingency in there for other things that have to happen that you find during construction. Because remember, these are based upon a walkthrough and a quick look at drawings and not real design to understand everything that has to go
I
in.
understand the soft cost, so you're
Okay,
saying
great.
143,000 is soft cost.
Well, what I'm saying is out of the starting amount, Hunt, the numbers that were on that original number did not have that upcharge that Hunt shows on their summary page. That is a multiplier of 1.47. So 47% more takes you from 2 something to close to 3. The other thing that didn't have was the escalation. And when you add the escalation on that we've had, which we've gotten from our construction indices, which is about, I think it was about 10%, that's how that number that was a bare number added project costs and the proper escalation over what's been going on for all those years and results in this number. All that being said, we are using these numbers for budgets so we don't surprise. Because we don't want to, for example, use the original Hunt number and think that's got everything in the escalation and everything else, and then all of a sudden the number costs, it's 280 instead of 331, but it's so much higher because we didn't adequately understand what was in that original number. So
I will also say that I know why you keyed on that number, because I did the same thing. Of all of the other things that we escalated, the unit ventilators were in your middle school report, the things that I think increased the most out of anything. And I remember questioning that specific item. Like when I went through this report, most of it was, it went up a little bit here and there. And there was even some that really didn't go up at all. But the unit ventilators went up significantly in this report. And I questioned that. And I remember, I think, Wayne, you and I had a conversation about across the board in the industry, that is something that everybody is seeing a very increased cost in those classroom unit ventilator devices.
in the scopes of work that you're really looking at here, electrical equipment and the HVAC equipment are the things that got hit with the highest escalation since pre-COVID. Those are the things that are the worst. Now, there are other things that got hit, but you're not using steel and we're not doing a lot of re-roofing and all that other stuff. There are things that really rocketed up, and those are two things that went out of this world. And we've been trying, interestingly enough, we've been trying for all that duration through COVID. At first it went down because there was the scare of what's going to happen. And after we got through that little grace period of contractors are really worried about having work, contractors got busy again and the demand for the equipment went up and stayed up with federal funding that came out, et cetera. They went up and we've been having trouble making sure that our estimates are staying caught up with those rising prices. We are now at a point where our estimates are caught up and kind of getting past. What I'm hoping you're seeing here are numbers that are higher than what we're really going to encounter. What it's left us with is situations, and I don't think we have the situations here, but there are certain things that we can't get for a year or longer because we're left with some of that supply issue, particularly with electrical switchgear and generators, et cetera. But it's been a wacky ride through all this, and those are two places that have just been ridiculous. Now, what we want to do is we want to work with the district, particularly Mr. Wall, and make sure that we can get what we need. I think that there are some preferences that we have here for the type of equipment that we use. And if we have that, then we have to watch competition, because I want good competition for the equipment. If, for example, we want to use, and I'm not picking on Train, but if we want to use Train and it's just Train, then I want to worry about when can I get it, what's the cheapest way for me to get it, and how can I keep Train giving us a best price if they know that that's really what we want. I want to look at other options so that we can have good competition there. But that's what, you're keying in on that, and that's you picked the right thing, because that's a place where we've had continued issues.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, I know, that's a shocking number when you see that change.
Well, I will tell you something. I want to make this, kind of show you how this looks and why what Jersey Shore is doing is so important. School districts that are looking to build new buildings or additions. It wasn't too long ago that we would talk about $250 to $275 per square foot. So just look at a tile down here, that's a square foot. $275 a square foot, that's what we were looking at before COVID, maybe $250. I have projects now, and I have even estimates for projects right over the mountain for an addition, a simple classroom addition, that are like $340 a square foot. And I know of projects that are not in this area, but in the state, that are at the $400 level. So what you're seeing here is pieces of your building that are going up, but because you're being so fiscally thoughtful about keeping your buildings and taking care of your buildings, as bad as that is, you're still doing the best thing that you can do, the least cost thing, because we're not out adding on or building big buildings. So it's absolutely that crazy.
Okay.
Other questions?
I have none.
I know you had questions plural, I think I only got two. Mrs. Petrowski,
What's
did you have
that?
other questions?
So if we do like this, the stuff here with the on the bottom, some of that is on here, right, that, like the chillers.
Yeah, so if you look at the very last item on that list, it says district-wide priority items. That's everything that, on the report that Mark and I gave to the board.
For all the priority reports.
Yes.
So even on here, it says summer of 2026. If we say we borrow at this 8.9 million, are we able to do those things and hold that money until like summer of 2026?
Yeah. Yeah, because you would have 3 years to use that money, which would get you summer 24, 25, and 26.
Okay.
And,
I think
sorry,
what Damian was saying was basically some of that stuff we could purchase ahead of time to make sure that we have it here at time, so having to work with.
And we can spread that out. The other thing that I want to add to what you're thinking about is, what we want to do is, if the district says, go and start to figure this out, I want to be able to come back to you interim and say, this is where we see the cost, because then if we want to pick something out and move it aside, if we're looking at the high school and the elementary schools, if you'd like us to do that now and something else comes up and it's, we want to do some scope and it's $100,000, and we realize that's a priority, we could add it in or swap it out. But what I want to be able to do for you is come back very shortly with some better estimates after we've dug into this, so that and I'm hoping most things just go down, but it'll allow you to decide what it is that you think you want to spend or where, coupled with, hey, we've looked at the other buildings and we feel like this has caught it all, or here's a couple other things you can consider. Then with that estimate, you can really refine how much you want to borrow. And maybe you don't even borrow till closer to the end of the year when we have final numbers. That keeps pushing out the time that you have to spend the money. Because, and I think in arbitrage, you don't have to spend all of the money in 3 years, but you have to spend most of the money in 3 years. So what we would want to do is set it up so that you have that money in the bank. You're allowed to make interest on that money until you spend it. We have a cash flow that shows you spending it. And you're making some interest while you're waiting to spend it. And we take everything we design and set up, and we spread that out over time, meaning the money stays in the bank, you get the interest, and you only pay as you go. The other thing is if we do the design ourselves, working with Hunt, and I'm offering this as a solution, and I've talked to Dr. Ulmer about it. If we do that, there really aren't any costs until we go to construction. So there wouldn't necessarily be anything that you have to spend money on until you get really close to the end of the year. And that's only after you choose all your projects. What we would do then is anything that we design, we'd have on the shelf, and that would be yours to pick up later if you wanted, if it was like an alternate that we said we didn't want to do. Let's assume that we said we wanted to look at the domestic hot water heater at Saldaysburg. Well, we could design it and decide we're not going to do it now. Well, we still own the design. So whenever you want to do that later, you pick that design up and you just get a price for it and do it. So what I'm trying to set up here is flexibility that you decide how much you want to borrow and what your priorities are. You can kind of pick and choose them up to the last minute. We spread it out so you're making some interest on your investment, and we're doing it over time. I don't want to extend it out too long, that extending it out makes it cost more money or something. But if we're buying things early and setting that up, you should get the benefit of having interest, not doing too much too quickly and disrupting anything during the school years or the summers, and having the benefit of buying it early so that any continued inflation, you're avoiding that too. Just trying to put all that in one place so that it's best cash flow for the district, best way to make some interest earnings, and most flexible for the things that you ultimately want to do.
And when are you able to start ordering the things, though? Do you have to wait until the end of the year when we borrow the money?
No, we won't have to wait until you borrow the money. What we'll do is we'll wait until we agree on what the scopes are and what the costs are, then we'll order them. So when we did this before, we ordered in December, and that's what we'd be looking at this year. But then we had to come back in March to do all the install because we were behind on where the design was when we said, let's get going because we have COVID money. This time, we'll be a little ahead of that. And because we're spreading it out over time, we'll do the things next year that we can do in the summertime, and things that we have to wait on equipment for, we'll wait till we have it on hand, and then it'll go in real quickly, and it won't cost as much money because it can be done very quickly. You're not waiting on anything. And two, it won't be as disruptive.
It looks like it's sort of obvious, but just to confirm, there's none of the items on this project would cause us to be non-ADA compliant.
There there isn't anything that I'm aware of that would cause backward progress for ADA. If there's anything, and there could be some things in the alert and alarm that improve ADA.
Okay.
So from our perspective, from ADA, it's always an improvement.
Yeah.
So if that's maybe the short answer to that question.
Yeah, and I know you asked me that question. And most of the stuff on the list that Mark and I provided to the board that was a priority internally, it was equipment. It was a swap out of a unit ventilator, an exchange of an exhaust fan, a replacement of a chiller. None of that was doing work to the building that would cause you to be adjusting an ADA accessibility issue, which I think is where your question's coming from.
Right.
We're replacing equipment one for one. We're not going in and redoing a hallway or an entrance or something like that where we need to worry about, do we have to upgrade that space and make it ADA accessible or compliant?
Yeah, I think maybe another way to phrase that is we're not doing programmatic changes to these buildings. We are doing, and I think that our intention is that we're not doing any work that you would, anytime in the near future, make a programmatic change that we would fix something and then have to take it back down. We don't want to ever spend money that way. So, and I think, because we talked about that early, we wanted to be safe there, that we weren't going to go put new HVAC in a room that in a few years you decided you didn't want that room that way anymore. So.
Okay.
Now, this list that you said, where was this at? The district-wide priority items?
That's this list.
Oh, that is that list?
Yep. Except for, I think Mark and I had the high school chillers on there. No, wait.
That's a separate item.
That's a separate, they had pulled that out as a separate line.
Yeah, we made sure that what was on that list is on here. Everything that's, effectively, we have the priority 1 and 2 items from the middle school, everything that we were given by Mr. Wall and Dr. Ulmer, and they are all, plus the food service, I should say, and they're all represented in here. We've captured it all, and we actually, we're Santa Claus, we checked our list twice to make sure, because we understood that when you start to think about that borrowing, or, you know, are you capturing everything? Is there some room in there if you want to make other changes? It's easy to take things out and go down, but if there's something that you want that goes up, and knowing what we knew about the just under $10 million borrowing scenario, trying to find ways that you could stretch your dollars and get the most that you could for the most important things.
But so these items here then are part of this
Yes.
district-wide priority?
Yes,
So this 2.782 includes these figures up here?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you go down through Mark and I's list, it almost matches in order what they have on that table at the top,
Yeah.
except for the high school chillers, the pool,
And the refrigerator at the middle school.
and the refrigerator at the middle school, because that's captured in the food service items.
Okay,
So it's almost one for one.
all righty.
Other questions from the committee? So going forward, and I made my list, I'm gonna go back to Jamie Doyle and get her to run that first step over again with new numbers. I will see if she, even if she's not available to come and present it on August 14th, I know she'll be able to get it to me, that I can bring it to the board on the 14th. From that point, so let me ask this question first. Is committee comfortable with that coming to the full board on August 14th?
Jamie Doyle's
Yeah.
figures. Yeah, I think,
I'm fine with
That'll
that.
be the first step, is the full board needs to see that. Do you do you as a committee think that, because I can explain it, but I think Damien did a good job of explaining your ability to use your 3 years. I hadn't thought about interest earnings. That was good for this group to hear. And making those purchases over time as you shop them out, having the ability to make changes through the project as we go. Do you, as a committee, want him to come back on the 14th and discuss that in tandem with Jamie Doyle's presentation? Or do you want to do financial, give them a look, and do you have a thought on that?
I do, and I'm hoping this makes it easier, because I'd like to make a commitment as a partner to the district. What I would like to do, I'm happy to be here on the 14th. What I would like to leave here and do, and this is going to be for all of 12 days or whatever it is at my risk, I would like to talk to Hunt and make sure that they're seeing what we're talking about. I would, if it works out for the schedule for us and for the district, I'd like to get our folks to start to look at the other buildings. Then on the 14th, if you see Jamie Doyle's figures and you understand that this makes sense, we're already moving. Because if we're not moving, we're not going to get as much done next summer as we'd like. And I'd like to not lose the whole summer. I'd like to be able to do some work. Also, I want to be able to hit good bid periods, which are later in the year and not in the spring. So I'd like to take at our risk that we're going to start, I got to get some things hammered out with Hunt, because this is something that I'll add in. I think that before Hunt worked for the district and we worked for the district, and if Hunt designed something and we didn't like how it worked, we had to work it out, and we do. But if Hunt is working directly for us, I think that you can talk to us and it's our problem. And I want you to be able to say, if there's a problem, you just look at us and we fix it. And it's not, well, was it a Hunt design? Even though that works out okay with them, I think it will work fine if Hunt is working for us, and I think they'd be amenable to that. So if I can start down that path, knowing that on the 14th, you're going to say, yes, continue, or assuming that you're going to have the discussion and that, yes, you continue is an option that comes out of that. I'll start doing that while you're waiting to see what Jamie Doyle has to say. Then if the 14th goes and you see Jamie's information and you know we're moving down the track, you can say, yep, keep going. And if something is wrong, you can say stop, and it was, we took the risk. But that will keep you moving, and that will get us where we need to go in the shortest amount of time that I think is appropriate. And I don't think we're taking a huge risk by starting to work on this for all of 12 days. But I think that gives you less to decide.
So when you say look at the schools, you mean the schools that you have things listed on the priority list?
That as well as start to look at the other schools to develop what this was, so that you have that information earlier. Because we believe, sorry, I was taking this away, we believe that the administration has picked out the priority items for the other schools, but if we can have a look at those, you can have a report that looks like the middle schools sometime in the fall, and you can say, yes, we're validating that we did the right things, or, hey, we want to add one or two things there. And I don't know that you will want to add anything, but at least you'll have all the information. Because I think the report for the middle school was helpful for you to be able to see all that. And again, we'll do that in conjunction with Hunt.
The 686 that you referenced a little bit ago, that would be the additional debt service each year. Was that off of Jamie's report from?
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the last one of March 2022, which I can share this with the committee. She had done what could we borrow at existing debt?
Right.
But the first step was
10 million.
a 10 million. And so if you just stay in that step one chart, it tapers back off after the existing debt obligation.
Okay. I guess my skepticism is, speaking of the board, is that a year and a half ago, they were totally against borrowing. And plus the rates have gone up. I mean, I don't know what that number looks like now, but I just wonder what, we have two board members here, what has been, I mean, what do you think, I don't know whether you're for all this, but the position of the board then was pretty much unanimous, except for a couple, that borrowing until we have our current debt paid off was not something the board wanted to consider.
That is true. And that won't be till 2030, right?
Correct. Because I had put a plan in place, I asked Jamie to do that. What could we borrow a year ago and still maintain our current debt service? And the board didn't want to go down that road, which at that time the interest rates were more favorable than they are now. So I think it's going to be more of a difficult decision if you just look at, a year or two ago versus now.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Mrs. Dover and Mrs. Petrowski?
I think we should listen to what Jamie Dole has to say as a board, and then the board make the decision whether to move forward with borrowing or not. I know a year ago, everybody was, well, most of us were against borrowing. We just didn't know what was going to be happening. I don't know what they would say now. Let's see what Jamie Doyle says, I think.
Yeah, and plus, we've made some recent decisions
Yeah.
as a board to, I think, push our limit as far as the budget and tax increases. So I think we've sort of boxed ourselves in, I think, in my opinion, to, I find it difficult to have any additional money hit the budget as far as debt service. Or if we would end up buying this stuff, which we don't have enough in our capital projects fund to cover most of this, so we're sort of in a bind right now. But, if the committee wants to at least, have it on the board agenda the next time, I have no problem with that. But I guess I'm just wondering if the board has changed their position on borrowing and that kind of thing. Because there was definitely, the position was we're not going to do any capital projects to any great extent, because the only way we can fund it is borrowing, and we weren't going to borrow until 2030. So it'd be interesting to see what the board and why they might have changed their mind.
What is like interest rate right now?
Well, as we all know, the Fed rates, they've been bumping rates, and it's hard to determine how those decisions over the last year or two have, basically last year, affect rates, bank rates versus municipal rates. I'm not an expert on that, so, but I think almost for sure, I would think that it's not as favorable as it was a year or two ago.
Yeah.
We're just not in a position financially to go out and borrow money and know for sure that we're able to pay for it. So.
Well, I think one of the conversation that I'll have with Jamie Doyle in preparing that is, I remember I said she did two different scenarios. But the scenario will have to be within our existing debt service payment, and which was one of the things that we asked her to do before. Like, the amount of money can't go up, but we can we can wrap our current debt into a new borrowing and move that forward. We'll extend it, but not increase our obligation.
Yeah, so that's where it becomes a really important examination of keeping your current payments where they are because of the things that you just all talked about, but extending that time frame so that you can make the repairs now that you know what buildings are gonna, that all the buildings are open, that you have need at the middle school, et cetera. A lot of times a financial advisor will tell you, you want to make sure that you don't ride down on your debt service because you keep your debt service level and you continue to put money in your buildings so that you're fixing them up. It's when that number goes up that it causes a problem for other programs, et cetera. And if you can find a way to keep that steady with that debt wrap, then it allows you to fix up your buildings and keep them in good stead so that you continue to maintain and you don't have major issues. And I think that would be a big goal of what that would look like. And if that then starts to change what's available, then we have to make other decisions. So, and we see this often. So there's the idea of borrowing more money and there's the idea of making sure that you're extending something that's level to maintain your buildings. And they're very, that's when I started to talk about new construction and additions. When those new construction and additions happen, that service goes up. When school districts are being good stewards of their money and they're maintaining their buildings and that service stays the same or doesn't change very much, that's really where a lot of districts like Jersey Shore Area School District will seek to go.
And unfortunately, we've been able to budget money, or set aside money, let's put it that way, to any great extent to be able to fund much out of our own dollars. And so that's why relying on debt is pretty much where we're at. Any other questions?
Beyond a presentation from Jamie Doyle, and I know Damien has offered for his team to move forward and look at some of these things more in depth. Is there anything else that you would like to see the board do on the 14th beyond make a decision about financing?
What I'll do when we leave, because I think it's going to be helpful, I think it's very helpful for everybody to understand the condition of the buildings and why steady over time, because if you think about this over 3 years, it's really putting $3.3 million into buildings each year that have been deferred for some time. In playing that catch-up, I think that it's the right thing for us to continue what I suggested we do. And then after you look at it with Jamie Doyle and you say, yes, we understand that we want to do something like this, we want to look at timing, because the way that I'm trying to set this up for you is there wouldn't even be a cost to the district until sometime next calendar year. That means you could look out into the future and say, do we think that in the next 4 months that interest rates are going to somehow drop? If they do, maybe you wait until that happens before you would borrow. But I think I want to get that set up so that along with what is Jamie Doyle saying, are we going to entertain this? If we can find ourselves something that is nice and steady in terms of that cost, then at least coming out with direction to say, continue down the path, because we're going to be interested in maintaining our buildings, even though we have to figure out to what level we want to spend. So if what I don't want to do is come away with the 14th and we're back to stop, because then nothing will happen and you won't be prepared to go when you want to go. If there's a decision that we're just not doing anything and we don't want to talk about it anymore, that's a very different matter. what I'm seeing in everybody's faces is an understanding that the buildings need to be upgraded. We just have to find out how to do it the most financially responsible way possible without spending more money than what we have budgeted for debt service. So I think that direction's what I'll seek from the board on the 14th.
I have a question for you and Mark. As best I can determine, there's very little, if any, building envelope items included in the 8.9 million, right?
You're correct.
So that would mean, for instance, a year ago, you and Mark in 23-24 suggested that we upgrade the 2005 roofs at the high school to the tune of $265,000. Is that, at this point, you don't think that, I mean, these were your priority items a year ago. For instance, that particular one are you saying now that's not a priority, or?
I would say it's a priority, but not as high as these items. Unless you-
Which one was Wayne referring to?
It says at the high school, roof upgrades, the 2005 roofs, that's how it was described in the, apparently the Hunt
Yeah,
report.
it's definitely not on the high list right now.
Okay. But a year ago it was.
I believe that might be on there as a mistake or a misprint. 2005 roofs, nothing should need to be upgraded on them at this time.
I think it was included in the building envelope list.
Right.
Which was the second, in our mind, the second step after the HVAC list.
I just want to make sure
we don't
that
miss it.
the envelope items, there's none in any of the buildings that are critical within the next 2 or 3 years.
The other thing that looking at those other buildings would help us do is if we do think something's critical, we could potentially address it. Probably with the roof stuff, I've seen a lot of school districts where they can do it is coat roofs to get more life out of them because it's very cost effective. And if you maintain your roofs well, you can coat them and get a lot more life out of them. So I've seen that happen a lot. And once again, we want to be in a position where we're trying to get as much life out of things as we can. Or if there's anything that the district, wants to do on its own because it's very cost effective to do that, we want to search that out too. And we talked about that before. But I think looking at those other buildings will potentially answer some of those questions for you if we're moving ahead in some capacity.
The other big ticket item that's not covered here is the parking lot.
Right.
That's 2.6 million. Now, this was a year ago's cost. And they were scheduled or suggested in the next, the current summer and the next 2 years. So all I'm doing is trying to point out how much of the original stuff that you identified as being out of the Hunt's report that we wanted to do in the next 2 or 3 years, how much can we logically defer to do, the 8.9 million? And because, and we talked about this one out here, that was $500,000, but we talked about downsizing the area, which obviously would bring it down, but, it's good if we can afford it and all that to do the HVAC stuff, but is there going to be anything in the next 3 years that we don't know for sure that's going to need attention?
Well, I would say as these guys look at buildings, that will help you with that prioritization. They can help with that, but also you have the ability, even though we have this list with costs on them, that doesn't mean that, for example, the middle school food service items in the kitchen are gonna be on your priority list above a crumbling parking lot, where you could give them direction and say, hey, we would much rather you take care of this rather than this, and prioritize it accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah, so for example, we know that one of the we want to replace a cooler or both coolers. Maybe we do that, but we don't do the other stuff and we defer that because we can. And then you take care of things like parking lots or sections of parking lots. That goes toward the whole idea of what you're seeing here over time. The longer it waits, the more of an emergency it becomes, which gets us back to about the question of the difference of borrowing versus borrowing and not creating an additional budget issue for yourself. And I think that's really where we need to head, to do our best to get as much as you can without impacting your budget, so that you can kind of get your buildings on that program of maintenance where it's not constant deferral and then things get really tough on you.
I know I'm gonna go, before I have one last question. From your comments about being here on the 14th and wanting to make sure the board hears Jamie Doyle and is comfortable with you moving forward, do you want that, are you comfortable with that being a verbal approval from the board, or do you need that to be an action item on the agenda?
It's,
And maybe-
when you have a partner for so long, verbal approvals work. If that's easiest for the board, that's fine. We have to honor our clients in understanding that they make decisions and they can change their minds. So if you're comfortable with verbal approval that, yes, we've talked about this, we understand the need, and we're gonna proceed in some way, we're gonna continue to proceed that way too. Ultimately, if we design a whole lot of stuff that you don't want to implement right now, you can get the designs from us and pay for that design, but then there would be no construction. So I think verbal or not verbal, we have the same commitment to each other, and I don't mind if it's not its own motion or what have you, or we get verbal direction. Does that help you, Dr. Elmer?
Is the committee, I'm just making sure the committee's okay with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from the committee?
Oh, I did, can we bring up old business now? Or?
Sure.
Yeah. How's the roof going at Sal? Is it done?
The roof's done, the only thing that's not done on the roof is metal edging needs to come in. That should be here August 14th, and we'll finish it that week, but we'll be done that other.
It looks like everything came in
Yeah.
at cost or
Yeah, there's
under.
no change orders.
Okay, all right.
Nope, everything's good at Sally's roof.
Will the edging be done before school starts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only reason if you drive, see all the scaffolding and stuff set up, that's a lot of safety scaffolding set down the backside of the building, they're gonna leave that in place, do that first, and then tear that down, finish the rest of the building on the way out.
Okay. Thanks.
Anything else?
Anything other questions on the project? Okay, item 5, courtesy of the floor for any items, including those not on the agenda. Please state your name and your place of residence.
I had a question on the status of the roof, and my
All right.
question's been answered.
All right. Okay, hearing none, the next agenda item is scheduled next meeting, and tentatively, subject to your approval, will be on October 16th at 6 o'clock. Is that the day of the week? Is that a Monday?
I
or-
think it's a Monday, let me double check. Remember, that would have been the meetings that we scheduled for the year.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a Monday in between board meetings.
I will tell you if that's your schedule and if we would elect to, continue forward, I'd like to request that we could be on the agenda so we could give you an update and refine some things. I want to make sure that if we're going to take these steps, that we can work with the district and the administration and say, yes, we know we want to do this, no, this might wait, et cetera, and refine these things so you're getting reported on, not only at this committee, but at the board level.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. The other thing I will say to the board is, like, we can always, in the interim, I can give reports to this committee and to the full board on anything that they're working on, which I've done before, just so that you don't think we're not gonna talk about this after August 14th until October 16th. I'll keep you updated on what they're doing and what's getting worked on.
No, I don't have a problem if we want to schedule another
And
capital
we
project
can-
in September.
What we can do as well as I and Mark talk to them and they say like, hey, we need to come back to the committee, we can do that. And we can do that quickly because, and I know that our pattern here has been, these are public meetings. They don't have to be, and I say that carefully because I know the community wants to be involved and wants to see what we're doing, but it helps with the notification and advertising requirements because we can call one of these quickly and get in here. Even if we make it public, you don't have to advertise a committee meeting like you do a board meeting because you're not actually taking any action here, you're recommending to the board. So that helps in that if something comes up, we can always come back in here pretty quickly as long as it works for all of your schedules. Still can stream them and all that kind of good stuff, but it helps with the response.
Any other business? Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Did I get you out?
Yeah, my meeting's at 12.